here at Mountain Stream. And the way this evening works is we have a meditation, and then it's lightly guided. And then we have a little break. And then I'll give you some Dharma words. And then we'll have some discussion, some Q&A. And then we'll close out with some announcements and some metta and dedication of merit. So that's the rhythm of the evening. So let's just begin with some meditation. And so making yourself comfortable, maybe wiggling a little bit, feeling into the seat and the space and this body. And yeah, really important that we don't become too rigid, too tight, and keep a sense of ease and relaxation, but also a sense of steadiness and stability as well. So there's always this balance. And so the same thing with the inner experience as well. And so our outer experience, or how we are in the body, um, perhaps reflects how we want to be in the mind. And so an agile mind, but also a stable mind at the same time. But the beginning here, we're just trying to settle in, the sense of relief of arriving, feeling the energy from the day, perhaps some momentum. So this gradual settling. And as you begin to come into stillness, just begin to just scan the body, allowing the attention to just move through the body. And I like to kind of visit places that I'm not used to visiting, like uh, maybe the little toe on the left foot, or the back of the lungs, or the inside of the rib cage, or the inside of the skull. Just allowing the attention to feel into perhaps what is unfamiliar, but also familiar. And then eventually we just allow the attention to take up residence in the entirety of the body. We can use the breath as our anchor. So the breath is there, in and out, but experiencing breath in a broader way through the entirety of the body. And now that we've established some attention, some stability with the breathing, begin to just open out into the senses, the felt experience, the sense experience, with the breath being our anchor, our foundation. Notice any contraction or any tightening. It's always nice to take a long inhale, long exhale. Simply receive experience without judgment or requirements, without curating anything in particular, just receiving. And for the remainder of time here, perhaps we just focus on one sense. Maybe it's hearing, maybe it's seeing, maybe it's feeling. And see if you can receive it with the whole body. And so, can I receive sound through every pore? Can I allow the light to penetrate my entire being? As we near the end here, just bringing some attention to the heart, noticing the quality of the heart. And radiating kindness in all directions. All right. Good evening again. Hmm. Yeah, so that in that meditation, uh, I feel like examining the senses like that is a really important thing to do, because we're using our senses all day long, kind of like the tools that allow us to navigate and move around the world. But when we really look at the senses and experience through the senses, um, we start to really understand or see how the mind operates. And so in Buddhism, there's six senses, right? So the traditional five. Uh, the sixth one is not like psychic abilities or anything like that, or an M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's it's the mind. It's the mind. So the mind is is the sixth sense in Buddhism, which I find really interesting that the Buddha saw the mind as a sense, but it's a different sense than your hearing or your smelling or your seeing or touching. So everything is kind of processed through the sense of the mind. But when we start to see the mind as a sense, then it sort of um, dethrones the mind in in a way. Yeah, and we see it as a more of a tool for navigating the world rather than who we are. Because most people walk around just kind of thinking that their thoughts or their mind and their memories and the fantasies are actually who they are. But from this view, that's not who we are at all. Like, all the senses are contained within something that's much bigger. Um, so this mind is something that I'd like to talk about tonight. Um, but first, I something I also think is very important is really understanding why we practice. Yeah, why do we, if you are a practitioner, maybe you're here and you've never practiced before. That's great too, but something brought you here. But and this is something I didn't even think about until recently. I've been a meditator for 25 years. And one day I was like, why do I even do this thing? I was like, huh. Um, and so there's, am I what am I trying to get? Yeah. And we're kind of told in the Buddhist world that desire is bad, but um, it's not. The Buddha didn't talk about the desire as being bad, especially if it's within the context of spirituality. So if you had no desire, then you wouldn't be in this room right now, right? I wouldn't be sitting up here, and you wouldn't be, a practitioner at all. So that desire has to be there. But what is it that we really want? Do we want to become awakened? Do we want enlightenment? Do we want liberation? Um, I think that's really important to investigate because how we see ourselves and why we practice or why we do what we do is going to affect the entire spiritual path. Yeah. So why do we do what we do? Um, I used to, I don't know why this is coming to mind right now, but uh, I was a yoga teacher for a long time, and I trained teachers. Uh, and there's this pattern in the yoga world where it's people become collector. I call them collectors, collectors of trainings and certificates and retreats and you know. And so sometimes you'll look at a teacher's website and they've done, there's a list like this long of all the trainings they've done. And then you look at how long they've been practicing. It's been like 2 years. And I started to, it's always interesting when you go on like a silent retreat, like at one of the centers, and you have to list all the retreats you've been on. It's like, all right, I've done this retreat, I've done this retreat, I've done this retreat. It's like, and we can kind of do that. There's sort of this like spiritual materialism that comes with a lot of our spiritual practice. Like, I have this teacher, and I have this teacher, and this teacher, and I've been on this retreat, and I've done this long in silence, and I've done that and that. And you become these collectors. And it's really interesting. I was a collector. I'm talking about this because I was definitely a collector for a very long time. It made me feel good. Like, um, but it also speaks to this sort of trap that we get into in our society, this kind of constant accumulation or um, this consumption, this consumer culture that gets sort of laid over our spiritual life. And that just sort of happens because of the patterns in our society. And so many of the thoughts and many of our habits aren't even really our own. They're our societies or our cultures. Um, and so really understanding why we do what we do is really, really important because that's going to affect you again on every aspect of your step on the journey. And as far as the Buddhist path goes, or this kind of it doesn't even have to be Buddhist. It's just this contemplative path. Um, yeah, just like Jesus wasn't a Christian, Buddha was not a Buddhist. um, the Buddha was not trying to promote Buddhism. Like there wasn't like he wasn't creating a religion. In fact, he left no heirs to his teaching. Um, So I'm always careful. I call myself a Buddhist. There was one teacher I heard, one of my old Zen teachers. He's the only time when it's useful to call yourself a Buddhist is when you're filling out your passport and you have to put religion, put Buddhist. That was kind of funny. Um, but in this in the path of the Buddha that the Buddha laid out, I feel like there's really two different kinds of paths. There's one that is, and this wasn't laid out by the Buddha, but this is kind of what it's become. Um, you can learn some really valuable techniques to de-stress your life and to become more mindful and to make you better at your job and to make life much easier. So there's definitely techniques and technologies within the teaching of the Buddha that make life much better, for sure. So there's that path. But then there's also the path which the Buddha actually taught, which is a path of liberation. So I'm not saying one's bad and the other one's good. I'm just saying it's really important to understand why you're practicing. Are we practicing for liberation? And I'll talk about liberation from what in a minute. Or are we practicing just to make life a little bit more comfortable and easy? Um, that's really important. And so in kind of in the modern mindfulness movement, there's this extraction from the Buddhist teaching that where they've taken out parts of it, like mindfulness or metta. And really like these things are the way the Buddha taught, it's this all-encompassing path. It's this, it uh, I had a teacher who said it ruins your life. And what he's talking about is that he said it ruins your egoic life. It ruins your samsaric life. Samsara is like this wheel of suffering that we kind of get caught in. Um, and I worked in the I did a lot of corporate mindfulness for a few years. And I think it was really helpful for a lot of people, but there was still like an ickiness to it, I felt. I think it's better than having nothing, but I always felt like I don't want to speak for anybody else, kind of coming in to lessen the, um, to lessen the blow of kind of the capitalist culture, to make that become a little bit more palatable for people. And so there wasn't really a change in how people did things or the culture of the corporation or the work week or the hours or the expectations on productivity. In fact, we were kind of brought in so people would become more productive and feel better about what they were doing, working 50, 60 hours a week. And so there's always this kind of ickiness to it. For me, like just that's just I'm not saying I'm not speaking about anybody else but myself. Where what the Buddha was teaching, when the Buddha taught, he was pretty radical. You know, when he taught, he was trying to dismantle the caste system. He was, he was taking people out of their kind of empty ritualistic lives, and this was a path of liberation that included ethics and practice and philosophy and the way you approached and lived your life. It was this radical thing. It was this uprooting of the conditions with which you've been living your life to do something different on this path of awakening. And so like liberation kind of sounds, I don't know, it kind of starts to sound, it doesn't sound, it kind of has that word kind of has a bad rap. um, or even saying freedom has a doesn't have a great tone to it these days. But that's really what the Buddha was teaching, is this path of liberation. And so I'm not judging anybody who just wants to, you know, use mindfulness to be able to go to sleep at night. Like that's awesome. That's great. But the Buddhist path is essentially a path of liberation. It goes against the stream. It it gets us out of this constant cycle of samsara, cycle of suffering. Yeah, we can stay in the cycle of suffering, and it becomes a little bit easier to be in that cycle of suffering. But ultimately, what the Buddha is trying to do is just to break that whole system down. And so, what are we liberated from? That's really important. What are we liberated from? I think I kind of already said it, but we're being liberated from the mind that confines, the mind that defines, the mind that limits us, the mind that creates suffering, the mind that thinks that this is all there is, that mind that keeps us in our conditioning, in our conditionality, the mind that sees no other options, the mind that only has one way of approaching life. Yeah, the mind that um, judges us into a box, a particular box. That's what we're being liberated from. And what's interesting is we're not getting rid of the mind, because in this teaching, the same mind that creates suffering is the same mind that creates liberation. It's the same mind. Nirvana and samsara are are the same in a sense. We can just begin to incline the mind towards more skillful, more liberative ways of being in the world and with the world. I love this. This is one of my favorite teachings of the Buddha here. It's the very first two verses of the Dhammapada, which is part of the Pali Canon, which is the teachings of the Buddha. But they're very Zen-like. They're like these pithy little verses, these pithy little phrases. So a lot of people new to the Buddhist teaching read the Dhammapada. I would highly recommend it. It's great. But these are the first two. It says, all experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows, as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. That was the first verse. The second verse. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows, like a never departing shadow. And I first read that and I was like, oh, that's nice. That's nice. And just kind of moved on and continued reading. But it's a pretty profound statement, right? All experience is preceded by mind. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows, as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows, like a never departing shadow. I like this juxtaposition between corrupted and peaceful. It's like the opposite. Peaceful is the opposite of corrupted. And so what the Buddha is kind of saying here is our natural state is peaceful. It's peaceful. And then we get conditioned into a corrupted mind. And corrupted just meaning kind of a self-centered, egoic, self-centered, self-cherishing mind. So this is like a really profound declaration of the primacy of the mind. Yeah. He's emphasizing that our thoughts shape our experiences and by extension, our reality. So what we think, we become. What we think, we create. What we believe is causative. The way we act, the way we uh, believe, the limitations, all of that's causative. And another word for this is karma. So, we're constantly conditioning the next moment by our current behavior right now. So if we if we um, if we work from a mind of peace right now, we'll create happiness for the future. If we work from a place of egoic corruption, uh, greed, hatred, delusion, we'll create hatred in the future. It's pretty direct. So the mind here is placed at the very center of our existence. So it's highlighting that the mind is the forerunner for everything, for all of our experience, which is very interesting. It makes me very happy. There's like this freedom that's there, that things can change, no matter what situation you're in or how you feel. I'm not bound to my moods. I'm not bound to these thoughts. I'm not bound to anything at all. If this is true, then right here in this moment, I can condition a different future if I need to, or if I want something different. How about the shadow? Yeah. Yeah. I think someone so Zoomer, someone in the room asked about the shadow. Um, so when we yeah, so when we talk about happiness, that doesn't exclude the shadow, because the shadow is as liberative as what's out in the open. And so it's really about bringing the whole of experience into this here now. So if the shadow is seen, then it's liberative. It's about seeing the shadow. So the corrupted mind wouldn't even look at it. Yeah. So the corrupted mind wouldn't even, um, or it would, how many people just spend their whole lives running from their shadow? And so the Buddha was like, no, turn towards it. Always turn towards it. Always turn towards it. So that's what creates peace is seeing the whole thing. There's another question. Is there a Buddhist teaching of the shadow? Um, not not trying to think. Well, really, not directly that I know of. The Buddha just kind of uh, told us to turn towards all of it, all of suffering, all of everything, and seeing life, all of life, as a reflection of our own mind. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. We can talk about that a little bit more coming up. So as I said before, in Buddhism, we talk about the mind a lot. In fact, we could consider the whole Buddhist path as a cultivation of the mind. Yeah. And so it's this practice of inclining the mind towards what's wholesome, what's beautiful, what's skillful, and turning towards the liberative, seeing what's actually there, looking directly. But, there's this question though, what is meant by the mind? So we talk about the mind a lot, but it's more than just the brain. It's more than just like a central processing unit. Um, there's the English language kind of falls short in the Pali and in the Sanskrit. There are many words that are translated in the Pali text as mind. So I'll talk about a few of those. But just kind of in general, the term mind refers to um, the aspect of our being that experiences, that knows, that perceives. And the mind is considered to be the basis of our thoughts, our emotions, our perceptions, and consciousness. So understanding this is really, really important. So this is going to be a multi-parter talk. I'll do the next part next week because I'm speaking next Monday as well. But the first one is what we call chitta. Chitta. So this is always often translated as mind, chitta. And it's a really important word. You see it through all of Eastern tradition, and even in the Yoga Sutra, the second verse is yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. Um, and so chitta, and so this is again often translated as mind, but really what it means is kind of, we can think of it as the heart and the mind together. So there's this is one thing. So and in fact, in many Eastern languages and Eastern thought, there's no distinction between the heart and the mind. I think John a few weeks ago said he had a teacher who, when he talked about the mind, he talked about here. He didn't go like this, my mind. He went like this, my mind. And so the heart and the mind are one thing, the chitta. So it kind of refers to this overall state of consciousness or mental attitude in any given moment. So mind state or a mood is kind of like how I think of it. Um, so it encompasses thoughts and emotions and consciousness. And in Buddhist practice, we're cultivating wholesome states of the chitta, um, such as loving kindness and compassion. So we're inclining again the mind towards these more open, skillful, wholesome states. And this kind of colors really everything, depending on your mood. So you can probably distinguish between when you're in a good mood and a bad mood, and how when you're in a bad mood, everything is bad, right? And then when you're in a good mood, and I'm being very general here, everything is like possibility and good, pretty good. And we usually just allow this to kind of change like the weather. We kind of wait around like, oh, I'm in a good mood. I'm in a bad mood right now. Give me some time, which is sometimes required for sure. Um, but what the Buddha had taught us was that the chitta is much more malleable than that. Like we can influence the moods and the mind in a much more direct way. And I think that's what the most encouraging thing is that we can change. Our mind does change. And this is becoming more and more uh, accepted and even further than accepted in neuroscience that the mind is constantly changing dependent upon our activities, our actions, which goes back to what I was saying before, that what we think about, we become. The brain actually physically changes according to what we practice, what we think, what we do. And so we can, in the moment, we can see, okay, is this behavior, is this mindset, is this, am I creating right now in this current place what I want to kind of incline my mind towards in the future? Is my behavior right now going to create the conditions in the future for how I actually want to live, the person I want to be, the awakening I want to realize? Yeah. Is my choice right now, the words I'm choosing right now, the behaviors I'm choosing right now, the way I'm acting right now? What is this going to create for me? Is this liberative? Does it lead to awakening, or does it lead to more suffering, more samsaric cycling? And so we can do that. And this is where the practices of mindfulness and our Vipassana practice becomes so valuable, because typically we're just kind of, again, just following the weather of the mind, just responding to the weather of the mind. But if we can take a bigger view, we can see and start to understand how things became the way they are. And then we can start to change our behavior, which kind of leads into the next aspect of mind, which is called manas. So manas is this aspect of the mind that is involved in thinking or directing thought or reasoning or conceptualization. This is where our practice comes in. This is where like metta comes in. This is where when we're meditating and we bring the mind back to the object, or we bring the mind back to presence, or we bring the mind back to this is where our teaching comes in. This is where all of this comes in to bring us back present. And so this is kind of like the volition which creates a response in the chitta. So these are the practices. This is the practice. And so the manas is responsible for forming ideas and judgments and intentions. And then this manas directs the chitta, where chitta is the overall experiencer of all things. And so there's this interplay back and forth between directing and receiving, directing and looking, mindfulness, and then directing. So knowing what I need when I need it. Do I need metta in this moment? Do I need more mindfulness in this moment? Do I need more concentration in this moment? Do I need something more direct in this moment? But none of that's possible if we don't know what's actually happening. So this is where the mindfulness and the vipassana comes in comes into play. Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of uh, discussion possibilities here. So I'm just going to end with this, and then we'll open it up to some conversation. And so ultimately, kind of what I'm getting at is the mind as the source of experience. Not that the mind affects what other people do, or the activities that go on outside of my body, but the way I receive it and see it and personalize it, that experience is up to me. And so the Buddha taught that the mind is considered the source of all experiences. That is, how I view experience. And so our experiences are shaped by our mental states and our perceptions, and perceptions can change. I can see things in many, many different ways. If you look at a situation, you can choose how you see things. You know, again, we get very trapped and confined into one way of seeing. But if we really begin to examine, there are many options for how to see things. And so, we're introduced to these in Buddhism. So, if I can see things through the lens of metta, I can see things through the lens of compassion, I can see things through the lens of understanding, I can see things through the lens of equanimity, I can see things through the lens of judgment, I can see things through the lens of self-preservation, I can see things through the lens of a particular culture or a particular time period or a particular person or a particular experience, or I can see that. There's all kinds of different ways to see this. And this sort of kind of gets into some of the emptiness teachings in Buddhism, which I'm not going to get into now. But knowing that there's different ways to see frees us to choose another option, which I find to be really incredible. If one way of seeing is causing me suffering, perhaps I can see it in a different way. There's always a different way to see. And so this is what is meant by the mind is the source of our experience. How am I seeing what I'm seeing? And what lens am I using? And this is an endless possibility, which I think is really incredible. I don't know. I wish I knew. Someone asked, how do you suppose the Buddha saw the world? Um, one of the things that the Buddha talked about was waking up every morning and scanning the world through a lens of compassion, seeing what needed to be done, what response was needed. And so when I, and you see this the way that the Buddha taught, he was responsive to who needed the teaching. He would teach in a different way, or if he was in a particular culture, or a particular village, he'd teach in a different way, or if somebody with not much experience, he'd teach in a way. So he was always seeing in this, he was always seeing, looking through this lens of compassion. Um, because he was often taught or asked, like, you're enlightened, why do you even meditate? Like, why do you practice? And he usually gave two answers. One was, um, I meditate to maintain a calm abiding. And then he also said, I meditate for future generations, which I think is really beautiful. And so both of those, to me, especially the second one, speak to this compassionate view of understanding, but even more importantly, responding. Uh, so yeah, it's tough, when you do start to kind of start to see things in different ways. It kind of becomes tough because you start to be on everybody's side. It's like, oh, I can see every angle to this. Oh no. So it's like, well, how do you choose? So it's like, the Buddha's advice was just what creates the least amount of suffering. What creates because the Buddha did, he chose sides. He did, he tried to stop a few wars. Um, in fact, his own um, clan, the Sakyans, was being threatened by a particular clan, and he stopped the war two times, but the third time he couldn't stop it, and his clan got slaughtered. He was always confronting kings and things like that. So he definitely had some opinions. Uh, but yeah, that was the advice. What causes the least amount of suffering? And uh, one really inspiring person that I really love. I'll end with this. This just kind of speaks to this mind as the source of experience, and how to view things, which is this woman. Have any of you ever heard of Eddie Hellesum? Hellesum? She was this. She lived in Amsterdam during the Nazi occupation, and she was a Jew. And she had this. She wrote this diary. She had this diary called, and there's a book called The Interrupted Life. And kind of being under occupation like this, she sort of documents it, and she writes the most like beautiful journal entries, and with this particular perspective of compassion that's just really incredible. Still speaks to the atrocities and the awfulness of everything that happened, but as her own perspective on everything was really, really, it's really beautiful. And so even when she was first sent to a work camp, which were different than the concentration camps. Um, and so she had the diary, she wrote in the diary there, and we have it published for us to read here today, documenting her daily life there. Um, and actually the last page of the book is a page she wrote and threw out of the train on her way to the concentration camp, and then she was never heard from again. And it's an incredible, one of the best Dharma books I've ever encountered. But so this is when she was at one of the work camps, and says, ultimately, we have just one moral duty: to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it towards others. And the more peace there is in us, the more peace there will also be in our troubled world. And she's not speaking of like if there's more peace in her, like the Nazis will stop. She's like, the more peace there is in here, the more understanding I have for what's out there. It was a different way of seeing. Yeah, it was another way of seeing. It was a transformational way of seeing. Yeah. And that's what we're doing in this practice. There are multiple ways to see. Which one are we choosing? You know, that's why we practice. So, yeah, so I went longer than I thought. But I would like to open this up to any comments or questions or anything. Oh gosh. You choose, Marcia.
I'm waiting for the screen to come up on gallery view. Robin, if you would change it to gallery view. And this is Marcia in the meditation hall. And did you have a question, Marie? Okay. So please say your name into the mic so that people know who you are.
Hi, this is Marie. I think it's a great investigation of why, like for anything, why am I doing this? Like being honest with oneself. And I think of it as, I guess because there's so much to it in the immediate, I think of it as loosening my grip.
Mhm.
And so even the thought of intention of liberation or enlightenment, like I've let go of that because it's like there's enough here just to loosen my grip. And to me, that feels a bit of grasping for me with an intention, of that big, or I'm not sure how to say it, but it feels like a clinging to that idea, of,
Mhm.
I don't know, just want to share that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think letting go of awakening, letting go of enlightenment's a really good thing. And just, the Buddha was always talking about direct experience in the here and now. How do I respond now? And That's where life is. It's here. And there's always this like goal of enlightenment, there's this kind of undercurrent of not of always of just always keeping it in the future. Like it's always out there where it's always right here at every moment. So it's like moving more into and more into that realization. Um, yeah, I think it's a really good thing. Yeah, thank you. So constant letting go. So Ajahn Chah talked about it. It's the constant letting go, letting go of the grip of the ego.
Hi, Adam. This is Robin. I just want to let the Zoom people know that if they have a question, they can raise their Zoom hand under the reactions button, or if that really feels like too much, you can wave your hands and me and Adam can see you on the screen.
There's another question in the hall if there's nobody online.
Yeah, there was some around here too. Charlotte had one,
Charlotte?
and Vivian, and Priscilla, and
Hi, could you define two things? What's the relationship between mind and thoughts? And secondly, what's the relationship between mind and consciousness?
yeah, that's yeah, there's lots of ways to talk about that. And so really, all of those could be called mind. And it's like it's some people, it just depends on how you see. The Buddha kind of kept it pretty broad, though there are, the way he talked about consciousness is like there's ear consciousness and eye consciousness and nose consciousness and mind consciousness, and talked about it kind of like that. But um this is another thing that will kind of change how you approach spiritual life. Like some people think like this is what's like real, like this thing here, and my brain is kind of creating consciousness, and that's what's real. Some people feel like consciousness is transcendent and everything out here is sort of consciousness. Like even my sense experience is consciousness. I'm not really experiencing material reality. I'm just, there's just the senses. So yeah, thoughts are kind of what the mind does, um, or what the brain does, arisings in the mind or within the chitta. And then the manas is the directing, like a directed thought. So there's kind of the thoughts that are kind of coming and going, and the thoughts that are directed. Um, and then yeah, consciousness can mean lots of different things. I have my personal views on it, but yeah, what do you think it means?
I've been listening to Michael Singer, amazing teacher. So he said consciousness is that sees and perceives everything. The moment we're making decisions on should I do this? Should I take that? There's something behind the mind that helps us to identify. And our practice is to clear the mind so we can have the consciousness be in its predominant seat instead of in the background. Because when the busy mind and busy thoughts, we will not perceive the consciousness. So the settling, the quieting, the letting go, all the ego, all the thoughts, through our daily practice, that's the letting go. And then the consciousness would be more in the seat of our awareness and our life. And I found that very, for me,
So it's
beautiful.
about clearing to allow. So
Yes.
it's like more of a passive
Yes.
thing. Yeah.
Yes, because there's something watching our mind, and that's consciousness at all time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Is there time for another question?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know. You're doing the announcement, so.
I'm Priscilla, and I'm just curious about the concept of stabilization, and I think of it as on the cushion to stabilize the
Mm.
mind. And I'm wondering if it's also, you know, something that is used in daily life as far as stabilization, and that would be stabilizing the mind. So in terms of what you've been talking about, the stability is really in the flexibility, it sounds like.
Mm.
And and it's because I thought about it as really bringing consciousness to a higher level, basically, and being able to hold that level. And in that experience, it seems like you don't have so much of these experiences of it's like, you know, the constant resets that are going on.
Mm.
Could you comment on that difference? In other words, coming to a high place, perhaps in meditation, and then dealing with the unpredictability of the mind in the daily situation.
What do you mean by high place?
Well, high place is what I'm saying is a place where the in other words, there's a very deep peacefulness in the mind
Mm.
that is not distracted.
Mm-hmm.
That I think of it as a meditative state, and then ideally it might go into, you know, everyday life.
Mm.
Um, so I'm just thinking of these two possibilities, and how do you talk about them as being how, how you talk about stability in terms of this flexible situation,
Mm.
and in terms of reaching these maybe higher states of more evenness.
Yeah. I think I know what you mean. Yeah, there's different ways to talk about to find stability. You know, the one is connecting with like just awareness itself. And so we tend to pay attention to the objects of attention, pay attention to the objects of our awareness or attention. And so the thoughts and the sounds and the things, but there's this, but once we kind of look, we understand that all things that arise within a field of, you know, if it's sound, it rises out of silence and returns to silence. Movement comes out of stillness and returns to stillness. And so there's this field within which all things are arising and falling. The field is what we are. We're not the arising and falling of things. And so we begin to identify with the field rather than the things. That's the stability that I think of. Um, and so when I'm meditating, um, if I'm overly concerned about you know the arising of things, then the dog barking is going to be a distraction. Like the chainsaw this morning that was by my house is going to be the distraction, or the wood chipper, whatever it is. But if I'm you know if I'm identifying with the space within which all those things are arising, then there's no such thing as a distraction, because it's all just arising in a field of experience. And so that field of experience is the stability. And there's ways to cultivate that. Like, you know, mindfulness is a really good way, because mindfulness kind of becomes the 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 steadiness of the mind, where things are kind of going on and on and on. It's sort of our connection with that field. And then you can actually also be more direct. One of my teachers, so I was doing concentration practice for a long time with on my breath, and she said, don't just do it when you're sitting. When you stand up from your meditation practice, stay with the breath. When you're moving throughout your day, stay with the breath. See if you can go like all hours outside of sleep with the breath, which was a really great practice for me to create some stability. So when I let go of the breath, that steadiness would just kind of okay. Take a few breaths. And connecting with the heart here. And as the Buddha taught, allowing it to, just a sense of kindness to spread in all directions. And may our practice here be of benefit to all beings, including ourselves. May all beings be free from suffering and the conditions of suffering.